You think your phone connects you to the world. You tap a screen, the signal appears, and life keeps moving. Calls go through, messages arrive, data flows. It feels automatic, almost free. But what if every signal your phone sends has an owner? What if the invisible rules that let you connect were written long before you ever bought a device? And what if one company profits every single time you speak, scroll, or send a message, without you ever seeing their name? You believe power in technology belongs to phone brands? Or maybe to network carriers with towers and coverage maps? But the uncomfortable truth is this: the real control lives deeper than hardware, deeper than infrastructure. Because before your phone connects to a network, it must obey a system you never agreed to. And once you see who owns the signal, free communication stops sounding real. Most people believe communication became cheap because technology improved. Smaller chips, faster networks, better phones. The story feels simple. Innovation lowered costs and the world benefited. But communication didn't become valuable because devices improved. It became valuable because standards were created, and someone decided who could use them. Every phone, no matter the brand. Every network, no matter the country. Every message, call, or data packet follows the same invisible rules. Those rules are not laws of nature. They're agreements. Technical standards that decide how signals move through the air. And here's the part most people miss. Standards don't just enable connection, they create ownership. Qualcomm didn't need to build phones. It didn't need to run networks. It only needed to help define how mobile communication works, and then own the patents behind those definitions. Once that happened, the game changed. Because when a standard becomes global, avoiding it is impossible. You can choose a different phone. You can switch carriers, but you cannot escape the rules that make communication possible in the first place. That's how power becomes invisible. And that's why Qualcomm doesn't chase consumers. Consumers are already inside its system. The real surprise isn't that Qualcomm profits, it's how quietly the system traps everyone. You probably believe patents protect inventors from being copied, that they reward innovation and eventually fade into the background, a necessary but temporary shield. That belief collapses in mobile communication. Qualcomm didn't patent a product. It patented methods, the fundamental ways signals are encoded, transmitted, and decoded. Not features, not designs. The language phones used to talk to networks. When those methods were adopted into global standards, something subtle happened. Using the standard meant using the patents. And using the patents meant paying Qualcomm. Not once. Not upfront. Every time a device connected. This is where most people get confused. They assume patents expire, competitors catch up, and prices fall. But standards don't behave like products. Once a standard becomes universal, replacing it becomes almost impossible. Too many devices depend on it. Too many networks rely on it. Too many economies would break if it changed overnight. So Qualcomm didn't need to outsell anyone. It didn't need brand loyalty. It only needed permanence. Every phone maker, even giants, face the same choice. License the patents, or don't participate in the modern world. That's not competition. That's quiet inevitability. But the real power appears when even rivals are forced to pay willingly. Think about how often you reach for your phone. Not for luxury, for reassurance. A message means you're not alone. A signal means you're not cut off. Connection feels like safety now. That emotional dependence is what makes the system so powerful. You don't evaluate signal standards. You don't compare licensing structures. You just expect the phone to work. And Qualcomm understands that expectation perfectly. Its system doesn't threaten you directly. It doesn't limit your access. It simply sits underneath everything, collecting value while staying invisible. This is the most stable form of power. Control that doesn't feel like control. Even phone brands that compete aggressively still cooperate here. They fight on screens, cameras, and pricing. But beneath that battlefield, they all kneel to the same rules. Because no company can afford to ship a phone that doesn't connect. And no consumer would buy one. So every text you send confirms the system. Every call reinforces it. Every upgrade deepens the dependency. You're not trapped by force. You're trapped by necessity. And that's the most human kind of vulnerability. Then comes the moment Qualcomm realized it didn't need to negotiate anymore. The turning point came when Qualcomm understood a rule most companies never see. If you control a standard, you don't need to control customers. you control everyone who needs access. Qualcomm stopped thinking like a product company. It started thinking like a toll authority. Phones would change. Networks would evolve. Generations would upgrade from 3G to 4G to 5G. But the underlying rule stayed the same. If a device speaks the global language of mobile communication, it pays rent. This is why Qualcomm could lose market share in chips and still grow stronger. The headlines focused on competition. The balance sheet focused on licensing, because licensing revenue doesn't fluctuate with fashion. It doesn't depend on which phone is popular. It scales with human behavior. More phones, more messages, more data, more licensing. The brilliance of the system is that it feels fair on the surface. Qualcomm argues it invested early, that it funded risky research, that standards wouldn't exist without those inventions. And that's true. But here's the hidden rule most people miss. Once a standard becomes essential, innovation turns into permission. Companies no longer ask, "Can we build this?" They ask, "Who do we have to pay?" That's the moment power stops being visible and starts being permanent. But permanent systems always teach lessons, if you know how to read them. Qualcomm's story isn't really about technology. It's about position. Most people chase products, some chase brands, a few chase infrastructure. But the most durable wealth comes from owning rules instead of outcomes. Qualcomm didn't predict which phone would win. It didn't bet on consumer taste. It bet on connection itself. This is the lesson hiding beneath the patents. When you own the system others must use, competition becomes irrelevant. That idea applies far beyond technology. Payment networks don't sell goods. They sell permission to transact. Property owners don't run businesses. They rent the ground beneath them. In each case, the surface activity distracts from the deeper control. For individuals, the implication is uncomfortable but freeing. You may not control markets, but you can recognize when you're playing inside someone else's system. And once you see that, you stop blaming yourself for outcomes you never controlled. You stop confusing effort with leverage. You start asking better questions. Where does value have to pass? Who owns that path? And what happens if I build closer to the rule than the product? That shift, from participant to observer, is where real clarity begins. And today, Qualcomm's system is more relevant than ever. Today, Qualcomm's position is stronger than ever. Not because phones stopped evolving, but because the world became more connected. More devices now depend on mobile standards than ever before. Phones, tablets, cars, sensors, machines. Entire cities communicate wirelessly. Each new generation promises speed, lower latency, more capacity. But each upgrade also reinforces the same foundation. New standards don't replace the old system, they extend it. That's why Qualcomm doesn't need to dominate headlines. Its power compounds quietly as connectivity expands. As long as the world demands constant connection, the rules behind that connection remain priceless. This is the future most people misunderstand. They fear disruption will destroy incumbents. But infrastructure incumbents don't get disrupted easily. They get deeper. And the more invisible the system becomes, the harder it is to challenge. Which leaves one final question you can't ignore anymore. Qualcomm's story isn't meant to make you angry. It's meant to make you aware. You didn't fail to see the system. You were never shown where to look. Most people are taught to chase outcomes. Jobs, products, brands, titles. Very few are taught to notice rules. But once you start seeing systems instead of surfaces, power becomes easier to understand and less mysterious. That's what RINH Wealth exists to do. Not to tell you what to buy, but to help you recognize where control really lives. Because when you understand the system, you stop blaming yourself for playing inside it. And clarity, not motivation, is what actually changes how you move through the world. The moment you see the system, you can never unsee it.